The preservation room of the New Orleans Historical Society smelled of chemicals and ancient paper. Sunlight filtered through the high windows, casting long rectangles of light across the wooden floor where dust particles danced in suspension. It was late August, and the air conditioning struggled against the merciless Louisiana heat. Despite the technological advancements of 2025, the old building retained much of its original character and its original flaws. Dr. Eleanor Pruitt wiped sweat from her brow as she carefully examined the newly acquired collection. The Devereux family had finally decided to donate their ancestral documents after holding on to them for over 150 years. As the head archivist, Eleanor felt a familiar thrill at the prospect of cataloguing previously unseen historical materials. "You should see some of these photographs," Marcus said, approaching her workstation. Marcus Chen had been her assistant for the past 3 years, having earned his master's in archival science from Tulane. "The preservation quality is remarkable, considering they've been sitting in an attic for decades." Eleanor nodded, carefully handling the brittle pages of what appeared to be a family Bible. The Devereux family was old money, even by New Orleans standards. Their plantation west of the city was one of the largest before the Civil War. She hesitated, then added, "Of course, that wealth came at a terrible human cost." "I found something interesting," Marcus said, placing a leather-bound portfolio on the table. "It's a family portrait from 1863, right in the middle of the war. The craftsmanship of the frame alone must have cost a fortune at the time." Eleanor put on fresh cotton gloves before touching the frame. It was ornate gold leaf, blackened in places from age, but still exhibiting the craftsmanship of a bygone era when wealth was displayed through such extravagances. The photograph itself was a large format albumen print, remarkably well preserved. "The Devereux family," she murmured, studying the stern faces. They were arranged in the formal manner typical of the period, no smiles, rigid postures, hands carefully placed. The patriarch, Beauregard Devereux, stood in the center, his hand resting on a Bible. His wife, Elizabeth, sat in a chair before him, her elaborate dress spread artfully around her. 4 children were positioned around them. 3 boys in formal attire and 1 girl in a white dress that would have been painfully starched. "Wait," Eleanor said, reaching for the magnifying glass. "Something's not right with one of the children." Marcus leaned in as Eleanor adjusted the angle of the desk lamp. Under magnification, what had appeared to be a shadow or a flaw in the photograph revealed itself to be something far more disturbing. The youngest child, positioned slightly apart from the others, had no face. Where features should have been was only a smooth, blank surface, as though someone had carefully erased every detail. "That's unsettling," Marcus said, his voice dropping to a whisper despite the empty room. "Could it be damage to the photograph?" Eleanor shook her head slowly. "Look at the quality of the rest of the image. It's almost pristine, and the blankness. It's too uniform. This isn't damage. It almost looks intentional. Could it be some early form of photographic manipulation?" Marcus suggested, though his voice betrayed his skepticism. "In 1863, technically possible, but extremely difficult and rare." Eleanor carefully placed the photograph under the digital scanner. "Let's get this digitized and enhanced. Maybe we'll see something we're missing." As the scanner hummed to life, Dr. Jameson Lewis, the Society's director, entered the room. In his 60s, with a full white beard and wire-rimmed glasses, he looked every bit the stereotypical historian. "How's the Devereux collection coming along?" he asked, then noticed their expressions. "You two look like you've seen a ghost." Eleanor motioned him over. "Look at this family portrait, specifically the youngest child." Dr. Lewis bent forward, squinting through his glasses. His expression changed from curiosity to confusion, then to something approaching alarm. "Good Lord," he muttered. "That's not possible." "That's what we thought," Marcus said. "Some kind of damage or manipulation, right?" Dr. Lewis straightened up, removing his glasses to clean them nervously with his handkerchief. "No, you don't understand. I've seen this child before." Eleanor and Marcus exchanged glances. "Where?" Eleanor asked. "There's a painting in the Devereux house. It's a museum now on the outskirts of the city. It shows the family plantation in its heyday. There's a child standing in one of the windows. Local legend says it's the forgotten Devereux, a child who was supposedly hidden away because of a deformity or illness. But no historical record mentions this child, and the family records list only the 4 children we know about." He paused. "And in the painting, the child has no face." A heavy silence fell over the room, broken only by the beep of the scanner completing its work. The digital image appeared on Eleanor's monitor, the high resolution bringing new clarity to the photograph and to the disturbing anomaly at its center. "There's more in this collection, right?" Eleanor asked, her academic curiosity overriding her unease. "Letters, diaries, household accounts?" Marcus nodded. "Boxes of them. Most haven't been opened since they were donated." "Then we have research to do," Eleanor said firmly. "The Devereux family was prominent in this city for generations. If they had a secret, a hidden child perhaps, there might be traces in their private documents." Dr. Lewis nodded slowly. "I should warn you both, the Devereux family history is complicated. They were known for their eccentricities, even in a city famous for its eccentric characters." "What kind of eccentricities?" Marcus asked. "Beauregard Devereux was rumored to be involved in certain practices. This was New Orleans in the mid-19th century, when voodoo was widespread, and the line between Catholicism and older traditions was often blurred." Eleanor raised an eyebrow. "Are you suggesting supernatural elements, Dr. Lewis? That seems rather outside our historical purview." Dr. Lewis smiled thinly. "I'm merely providing context, Dr. Pruitt. As historians, we document facts, not folklore. Still," he glanced at the faceless child on the screen, "sometimes the historical record presents us with puzzles that defy easy explanation." As he left, Eleanor turned to Marcus. "Let's start with the family diaries and letters. Anything from 1860 to 1865 should be our priority. We need to establish who this child was and why they appear this way in the photograph." As they began organizing the materials, neither noticed the slight darkening of the room as clouds passed over the sun outside. Nor did they notice that in the digital scan on the monitor, the faceless child's hand, previously positioned at its side, now appeared to be reaching toward the edge of the frame. Over the following days, Eleanor and Marcus immersed themselves in the Devereux collection. The family's papers were extensive, spanning nearly a century from the 1820s to the early 1900s. Eleanor focused on Elizabeth Devereux's diaries, while Marcus tackled Beauregard's business correspondence and the children's school records. "Listen to this," Eleanor said on the 3rd day, reading from Elizabeth's diary, dated January 1862. "The doctor visited again today. He offers no comfort for our situation, only the same tired platitudes. B grows more desperate and speaks of consulting with Marie Laveau herself. I fear where such desperation may lead us." "Marie Laveau? The voodoo queen?" Marcus looked up from his own documents. "That would have been scandalous for a family of their standing." Eleanor nodded. "There are repeated references to a sickness in the house, but she never specifies who was ill. The 4 known children appear in her entries regularly, seemingly in good health." "I found something," Marcus said suddenly, holding up a ledger. "Beauregard made a payment in February 1862 to someone named Dr. Facilier. It's a substantial amount, equivalent to about $20,000 today." "That name sounds familiar," Eleanor murmured, reaching for her laptop. A quick search confirmed her suspicion. There are references to a Dr. Facilier in New Orleans folklore, supposedly a practitioner of dark arts, a Bokor rather than a Hungan, not someone Marie Laveau would have associated with. So, A desperate father seeking help beyond conventional medicine, Marcus summarized. But for whom? And what connection does this have to the faceless child? Eleanor was about to respond when her phone buzzed with a text message. She glanced at it, then looked up at Marcus with renewed excitement. The Devereux House Museum is having an evening tour tonight. Shadows of the Past. It focuses on the family legends and the supposedly haunted aspects of the property. Want to go? Marcus nodded eagerly. We might learn something that didn't make it into the official records. That evening, they joined a small group of tourists at the impressive gates of the Devereux Plantation House. The grand antebellum mansion stood silhouetted against the darkening sky, its white columns ghostly in the twilight. Spanish moss hung from the ancient oak trees that lined the drive, swaying gently in the warm evening breeze. Their tour guide, a young woman named Zora, who wore a period-appropriate dress, led them through the main floor of the house, recounting the standard historical information about the property and the family. Eleanor and Marcus exchanged glances as she glossed over the Civil War years, mentioning only that the family had faced difficulties like many others. When they reached the formal dining room, Zora pointed to a large painting on the wall. This depicts the plantation at its height in 1861. It was commissioned by Beauregard Devereux himself. Eleanor and Marcus moved closer to the painting. It showed the house and grounds from a distance, with tiny figures going about their daily activities. Eleanor's eyes were drawn to an upper window of the house, where a small, indistinct figure could be seen looking out. "Is that a child in the window?" she asked, pointing. Zora's smile faltered slightly. "You have good eyes. That's part of our Shadows of the Past portion of the tour." She lowered her voice dramatically. "Local legend speaks of the forgotten Devereux, a child who was kept hidden away in the house, never allowed to be seen by visitors. Some say the child was born with a terrible deformity. Others say it was the result of a curse placed on the family." The other tourists murmured appreciatively at the spooky tale, but Eleanor pressed further. "Are there any historical records of this child?" Zora hesitated. Officially, Beauregard and Elizabeth had only 4 children: Robert, William, James, and Clara. But there are inconsistencies in the family records, expenses that can't be accounted for, rooms that were kept locked, and servants who were dismissed after speaking of a 5th child. As the tour continued upstairs, Eleanor and Marcus lagged behind the group. "She knows more than she's saying," Marcus whispered. Eleanor nodded. "Let's talk to her after the tour." They followed the group through the bedrooms and study, noting the opulent furnishings that reflected the family's wealth. In what had been Beauregard's study, a glass case displayed various personal items: his pocket watch, spectacles, and a small leather-bound book. "This is Beauregard's personal journal," Zora explained. "Most of it is mundane business matters, but it does contain some interesting insights into his character." The tour concluded in the parlor, where refreshments were served. As the other tourists drifted toward the exit, Eleanor and Marcus approached Zora. "We're from the Historical Society," Eleanor explained, showing her identification. "We're currently cataloging a recently donated collection of Devereux family papers, including a photograph that shows what appears to be a faceless child." Zora's polite smile vanished. "You shouldn't be digging into that," she said quietly, glancing around to ensure none of the other tourists were within earshot. "Some things are best left in the past." "So you know about the photograph?" Marcus pressed. Zora sighed. "Follow me." She led them to a small room off the main hall, unlocking it with a key from her period costume. Inside was a small office with modern equipment, clearly not part of the regular tour. "I'm not just a tour guide," she explained. "I'm completing my PhD in Louisiana history. The Devereux family is my specialty." She turned to a filing cabinet and extracted a folder. "This information isn't shared with the public. The museum board feels it would detract from the historical significance of the house." She opened the folder to reveal photocopies of letters and diary entries, some of which Eleanor recognized from the collection they'd been examining. In 1861, Elizabeth Devereux gave birth to a fifth child, a boy they named Thomas. He was born with a rare condition. Zora hesitated. The medical terminology didn't exist then, but from the descriptions, it appears he may have had arynia. He was born without a nose, possibly combined with other facial deformities. That would explain why they kept him hidden, Eleanor said softly. It was more than that, Zora continued. Beauregard believed the child's condition was a punishment, that something had marked his son. He became obsessed with correcting the deformity, which led him to consult various practitioners of both traditional medicine and alternative methods, including Dr. Facilier, Marcus said. Zora looked surprised. You found those records? Yes, among others. What happened next is where history and folklore become difficult to separate. According to Elizabeth's later diary entries, some kind of ritual was performed. She doesn't describe it in detail. I suspect she wasn't present. But afterward, she writes about how Thomas no longer suffers from his affliction, but that the cure may be worse than the disease. And the faceless appearance in the photograph? Eleanor asked. Zora shook her head. I don't have a historical explanation for that. The photograph you found might be the only existing image of Thomas. He died in late 1863, just months after that portrait was likely taken. The official cause was listed as fever, but Elizabeth's diary suggests otherwise. Her final entry about Thomas simply states he has gone to a place where he will no longer be hidden away. May God forgive us for what we've done. As they left the museum, the night had fully descended, wrapping the old plantation in darkness, relieved only by strategically placed landscape lighting. The humid air felt heavy, carrying the scent of magnolias and the distant sound of cicadas. What do you make of it? Marcus asked as they walked to the parking lot. Eleanor considered the question carefully. As historians, we deal in documented facts. What we have is a family that concealed the existence of a child with a deformity, not uncommon in that era, and sought unconventional treatments that may have led to the child's death. The photograph remains unexplained, but early photography had many technical limitations and anomalies. That's the rational explanation, Marcus agreed. But New Orleans has always existed in the space between the rational and the otherworldly. Eleanor looked back at the looming silhouette of the house. I think we need to finish cataloguing that collection. There might be more to Thomas Devereux's story than we've discovered so far. As they reached Eleanor's car, her phone buzzed with a notification. The automated security system at the Historical Society had detected movement in the preservation room. Probably just a malfunction, she said, showing Marcus the alert. But we should check it out on our way home. The Historical Society building was dark when they arrived, except for the security lights that cast long shadows across the entrance hall. Using her key card, Eleanor disabled the alarm and led the way to the preservation room. The motion sensor light flickered on as they entered, revealing a space that appeared undisturbed, until Eleanor noticed the Devereux portfolio open on the table, the family portrait prominently displayed. Did we leave this out? She asked, though she knew they hadn't. Their last task before leaving had been to secure all materials in the climate-controlled storage cabinets. Marcus shook his head slowly. No! And look! The digital monitor was on, displaying the scanned image of the portrait. But something had changed. The faceless child was no longer standing slightly apart from the family. In this version, it stood directly behind Elizabeth Devereux, its blank face positioned just above her shoulder, its hands resting on either side of her neck. That's not possible, Eleanor whispered. Digital files don't change on their own. Marcus was already checking the computer. According to the file data, this image was modified today at 9:42 p.m. That was during our tour of the Devereux house. Eleanor felt a chill despite the warmth of the room. Save a copy of both versions. We need to document this. As Marcus worked at the computer, Eleanor carefully examined the physical photograph under the desk lamp. The faceless child remained in its original position, separate from the others. The digital file changed, but not the original, she noted. That suggests she was interrupted by a sudden drop in temperature. The preservation room, which had been uncomfortably warm moments before, now felt cold enough that she could see her breath forming small clouds in the air. The lights flickered once, twice, then stabilized. "Marcus," she said quietly, "I think we should leave." He nodded, quickly saving the files to a secure drive. As they turned to go, the lights went out completely, plunging the room into darkness, except for the glow of the monitor. On the screen, the image changed again. The faceless child was now in the foreground of the portrait, larger than before, as if it had stepped closer to the camera, closer to the viewer. Using the flashlight on her phone, Eleanor led the way to the door, trying to ignore the sensation of being watched. As they reached the hallway, the emergency lights came on, casting a dim red glow that did little to dispel the shadows. "Power outage," Marcus suggested, his voice strained. "Maybe," Eleanor replied, though they both knew New Orleans' summer blackouts didn't typically cause the selective power issues they were experiencing. They made their way to the main entrance, moving faster than was strictly professional. As they passed the display cases in the main hall, Eleanor's flashlight beams swept across a glass surface, revealing a reflection that made her stop abruptly. For just a moment, she thought she saw a small figure standing behind them, a child-sized silhouette with no discernible features. "Did you see that?" she whispered. Marcus turned, his own phone light cutting through the darkness. "See what?" But there was nothing there, just the empty hallway stretching behind them. "Nothing," Eleanor said after a moment. "Let's go." Outside, the night air felt oppressively hot after the unnatural cold of the building. They stood in the parking lot, looking back at the darkened windows of the Historical Society. "What just happened in there?" Marcus asked, his academic composure finally cracking. Eleanor took a deep breath. "I don't know, but I think we need to be more careful with the Devereux collection. Whatever happened to Thomas, whatever was done to him, it's left some kind of impression. You don't actually believe—" "I believe in being thorough in our research," she interrupted firmly. "And I believe there's more to this story than we understand yet." As they parted ways for the night, neither could shake the feeling that they had crossed a threshold, that in their search for historical truth they had inadvertently awakened something that had lain dormant for over 150 years, something that perhaps should have remained forgotten. The following morning dawned bright and clear, the typical New Orleans humidity temporarily displaced by a rare summer cool front. Eleanor arrived at the Historical Society early, determined to approach the previous night's events with renewed scholarly detachment. The power had been restored, and in the cheerful morning light, her fears seemed almost comical. She found Dr. Lewis already in his office, surrounded by open books and printouts of the digital scan she and Marcus had discovered. "Ah, Eleanor," he said, looking up as she entered. "I understand you and Marcus had quite an evening." Eleanor hesitated, unsure how much to share about their experiences. "We visited the Devereux House Museum and learned some interesting information about the family. Then we had some technical difficulties here." Dr. Lewis leaned back in his chair, studying her face. "The security system recorded the power fluctuations, most curious, and the changes to the digital file." "You've seen them?" Eleanor asked, surprised. "Marcus sent me both versions last night. I've been trying to determine if there could be a rational explanation. Perhaps corruption in the file data or some kind of processing artifact from the scanner." Eleanor sat down across from him. And I found nothing to explain it." He removed his glasses, rubbing the bridge of his nose. "Which leaves us with either a deliberate act by someone with access to our systems or—" He trailed off, leaving the alternative unspoken. "Dr. Lewis, what do you know about Thomas Devereux?" Eleanor asked directly. He sighed heavily. "Not much more than what you've likely discovered. A hidden child, a desperate father, consulting practitioners of dubious methods. It's a tragic story, but not entirely uncommon for the era. But the faceless appearance in the photograph, that's not common, Eleanor pressed. No, he agreed. That remains unexplained. He hesitated, then opened a drawer in his desk. There is one more thing you should see. He withdrew a small leather-bound book. This came with the Devereux collection but wasn't included in the official inventory. I set it aside for further review. Eleanor recognized his careful phrasing for what it was. He had deliberately kept the item separate from the main collection. "What is it?" she asked, reaching for the book. Beauregard Devereux's personal journal from 1862 to 1863. His most private thoughts, not the business ledgers or the public-facing journals that the family would have expected others to read. Eleanor carefully opened the journal. The handwriting was cramped and hurried, unlike the meticulous script found in Beauregard's official records. Many pages contained strange symbols drawn in the margins, circles, crosses, and more complex designs she didn't recognize. He was documenting his search for a cure, Dr. Lewis explained. It begins with consultations with conventional doctors in New Orleans, then physicians from as far away as Boston and Philadelphia. When they offered no hope, he turned to alternatives. Eleanor turned the pages slowly, reading passages that detailed Beauregard's growing desperation. His writing became increasingly erratic as the months progressed, filled with references to the face that must not be seen and securing a proper visage. He was obsessed with his son's appearance, Eleanor murmured. Not the child's health or comfort, but how others would perceive him. The Devereux family reputation was everything to Beauregard, Dr. Lewis said. A child with a visible deformity would have been seen as a mark of divine disfavor, or worse, evidence of some sin or moral failing in the bloodline. Eleanor continued reading until she reached an entry from October 1862 that made her blood run cold. Today I have secured the services of the one they call Dr. Facilier. The respectable physicians have failed us, and even Marie Laveau offered no concrete solutions, only platitudes about acceptance. Facilier promises a true remedy, not merely to hide Thomas's affliction, but to remove it entirely. The price he asks is steep, both in gold and in other, less tangible currencies. Elizabeth would object if she knew the full terms, so I have told her only what she needs to know. A father must do what is necessary for his child and for his family's honor. The procedure will be performed at the next new moon. The next several pages had been torn out, leaving a jagged edge in the binding. When the journal resumed in December, Beauregard's writing had changed dramatically, more controlled, but somehow empty of emotion. The treatment has been completed. Thomas no longer bears the mark of his affliction. Whether Facilier's methods were medical or otherwise is irrelevant. The result is what matters. We have instructed the servants that Thomas remains in fragile health and must stay in his rooms, away from visitors. Elizabeth refuses to look at the boy. She says he is no longer her son. She's being hysterical, as women often are. In time, she will understand that I have saved our family from disgrace. Eleanor looked up at Dr. Lewis. What did he do to his son? I don't know, Dr. Lewis replied quietly. The missing pages might have contained the details, but whatever it was, it appears to have altered the child in a way that disturbed even his own mother. And then the child died less than a year later, Eleanor added, remembering what Zora had told them. Yes, in September 1863, shortly after the family portrait was taken. Eleanor closed the journal. Her academic interest now mingled with a deeper sense of unease. Where's Marcus this morning? He called in sick, said he wasn't feeling well after last night's excitement. Eleanor frowned. Marcus rarely missed work, especially when they were in the middle of an important project. I'll check on him later. In the meantime, I'd like to continue with the Devereux collection. There must be more information about what happened to Thomas. Dr. Lewis nodded. Of course, but Eleanor, perhaps some caution is warranted. These materials have been undisturbed for generations. Now that they've been brought to light, You don't actually believe there's something supernatural at work? Eleanor interrupted, raising an eyebrow. Dr. Lewis smiled thinly. I believe in being thorough in our historical analysis and considering all possibilities. New Orleans has a long history of blending the rational and the mystical. Sometimes the line between the two becomes rather blurred. As Eleanor made her way to the preservation room, she found herself more alert to her surroundings, the creaking of the old building, the shadows in the corners, the slight temperature variations between rooms. The preservation room itself appeared normal, with no sign of the previous night's disturbances. The Devereux portrait had been properly stored in the climate-controlled cabinet, and the computer systems were functioning normally. She spent the morning examining Elizabeth Devereux's correspondence, finding several letters to her sister in Virginia that hinted at the family's troubles. My dear Margaret, I write to you in strictest confidence, as there are matters I cannot discuss even with our parents. B has taken steps regarding T's condition that I cannot reconcile with Christian principles. He assures me that what has been done was necessary and that in time I will understand. But when I look at the child now, I see not my son, but something else entirely, something that wears an approximation of a human form, but lacks what makes us truly God's creation. The servants whisper when they think I cannot hear. 2 have already left our employ without notice. Marie, who has been with us since before R was born, crossed herself when she encountered T in the hallway yesterday and refused to enter his room to bring his meals. B insists that we maintain appearances. We continue to host dinner parties and attend social functions as though nothing is amiss. He has commissioned a family portrait to be taken next month and insists that all the children be included. I do not know how I shall bear it. Pray for us, dear sister. I fear we have strayed into darkness from which there may be no return. Your loving sister, Elizabeth. The letter was dated July 1863, just weeks before the family portrait would have been taken. Eleanor made detailed notes, then turned to the household accounts. Among the regular expenses for food, clothing, and servants' wages, she found regular payments to someone identified only as DF, continuing through 1863. The final payment, significantly larger than the others, was recorded in early September, around the time of Thomas's death. By midday, Eleanor decided to check on Marcus. His apartment was in the Marigny district, not far from the Historical Society. She texted him first, receiving only a brief, "not feeling well, staying in bed," in response. The heat had returned with a vengeance, and Eleanor's light blouse was sticking to her back by the time she reached Marcus's building. She rang the bell twice before hearing his shuffling approach to the door. "Eleanor?" he said as he opened the door, looking surprised and not entirely pleased to see her. He was pale, with dark circles under his eyes. "I told you I was sick." "You look terrible," she said frankly, stepping inside without waiting for an invitation. The apartment was uncharacteristically messy, with dishes piled in the sink and clothes scattered across the furniture. The blinds were drawn, leaving the space in semi-darkness. "What's going on?" Marcus sank onto the couch, running a hand through his unkempt hair. "I didn't sleep well. Had nightmares." "About?" Eleanor prompted, sitting across from him. He hesitated, then said, "About a child following me, a child with no face." Eleanor felt a chill despite the warmth of the apartment. "Tell me exactly what happened after you got home last night." "Nothing happened," he insisted. "I was rattled from the weirdness at the society, that's all. I had a couple of drinks to calm down, went to bed and had bad dreams. Then I woke up feeling like garbage and called in sick. End of story." But his eyes didn't meet hers, and his fingers fidgeted with the hem of his T-shirt. "Marcus," Eleanor said gently, "we've worked together for 3 years. I know when you're not telling me everything." He was silent for a long moment, then sighed heavily. "Fine. When I got home, I felt watched, like I wasn't alone in the apartment. I checked all the rooms, and of course there was nothing. I tried to distract myself by reviewing the files we'd saved, both versions of the portrait. And, Eleanor prompted when he paused, and there was a third version on my laptop. One I hadn't seen before, hadn't saved. His voice dropped almost to a whisper. In this one, the faceless child was looking directly at the camera, and there was a suggestion of features. Not a complete face, but as if something was starting to form. Could it have been a processing artifact? Or maybe you were more tired than you realized and are misremembering? Marcus shook his head. I know what I saw. And then in my dream, the child was standing at the foot of my bed, clearer than before. It spoke to me. What did it say? Eleanor asked, keeping her voice calm despite her growing concern. It said, "Help me find my face." Over and over. "Help me find my face." Marcus looked up at her, his own face drawn with exhaustion and fear. Eleanor, I think we've stumbled into something dangerous. This isn't just a historical curiosity anymore. Eleanor wanted to offer rational explanations, stress, suggestion, the power of folklore to influence perception. But the events of the past few days had begun to strain even her skepticism. "Let me make you some tea," she said instead, moving to the kitchen. As she filled the kettle, she noticed a small sketchbook on the counter, open to a page filled with the same strange symbols she had seen in Beauregard's journal. "Marcus," she called, picking up the sketchbook. "What is this?" He appeared in the kitchen doorway, looking embarrassed. "I was trying to understand the symbols in Beauregard's ledger. I thought if I could identify their origin or meaning, it might help explain what he did to Thomas." "And did you find anything?" "Some of them appear to be related to Haitian voodoo, protective symbols mostly. Others I couldn't identify." He took the sketchbook from her. "I thought if I could understand what Beauregard was attempting." "We could understand what happened to Thomas," Eleanor finished for him. The kettle whistled, and she busied herself making tea while Marcus leaned against the counter watching her. "Do you think we should stop?" he asked suddenly. "Tell Dr. Lewis to seal the collection, maybe send it to a larger institution with better resources." Eleanor considered the question as she handed him a steaming mug. "No," she said finally, "we're historians, Marcus. Our job is to uncover the truth, no matter how uncomfortable. The Devereux family did something to their son, something that had consequences we're only beginning to understand. We owe it to Thomas to discover what happened, even if it puts us at risk." Marcus asked quietly. "I don't believe we're at risk," Eleanor replied, though her conviction was not as strong as her words suggested. "We're experiencing the power of suggestion combined with sleep deprivation and the peculiar atmosphere of this city. New Orleans has always thrived on its ghost stories and voodoo legends. It's easy to get caught up in the mystique." Marcus didn't look convinced, but he nodded anyway. "So what's our next step?" "I found some interesting letters from Elizabeth and more records of payments to D.F., almost certainly Dr. Facilier. The last payment coincides with Thomas's death." She sipped her tea thoughtfully. "I think we need to learn more about this Facilier character. If he performed some kind of procedure on Thomas, it might explain the deformity that led to the faceless appearance in the photograph. The university library has an extensive collection on New Orleans folklore and historical figures," Marcus suggested, some of his usual enthusiasm returning, "including practitioners of voodoo and other traditions." "Perfect," Eleanor agreed. "Are you feeling up to a research trip this afternoon, or would you rather rest?" Marcus glanced around his apartment, as if assessing whether he wanted to remain there alone. "I'll come with you. Just give me a few minutes to shower and change." While Marcus got ready, Eleanor examined the sketches he had made more closely. The symbols were intricate and seemed to follow some internal logic, though their meaning remained obscure to her. On the final page, Marcus had written a name and address. St. Louis Cemetery No. 1, Devereux Family Tomb. When Marcus emerged, looking somewhat more like himself after a shower and fresh clothes, Eleanor held up the sketchbook. "You've noted the Devereux family tomb. Were you planning a visit? Marcus nodded, running a hand through his still damp hair. I thought it might be worth seeing if Thomas is listed among the family members interred there. Cemetery records from that era are sometimes incomplete, especially for children who died young. Good thinking, Eleanor agreed. We can stop there after the library. The Tulane University Library's Special Collections Department was housed in a modern building that contrasted sharply with the historical materials it contained. The air inside was cool and dry, a welcome relief from the oppressive heat. The librarian, Dr. Sophia Valdez, greeted them warmly. The Devereux collection. Yes, I heard the Historical Society had acquired it. Quite a coup. She led them to a private research room where she had already assembled several volumes. These contain what we know about Dr. Facilier. It's not much, I'm afraid. He wasn't as well documented as Marie Laveau or other prominent practitioners. And the materials included city directories from the 1850s and 1860s, newspaper clippings, and a dissertation written in the 1970s about non-traditional medical practitioners in antebellum New Orleans. Thank you, Eleanor said. We're particularly interested in any procedures or treatments he might have performed, especially related to facial deformities. Dr. Valdez raised an eyebrow. That's quite specific. May I ask why? Eleanor explained about the faceless child in the portrait and what they had learned about Thomas Devereux. Fascinating, the librarian murmured. There are references to Facilier in some of the Creole folk tales. He was said to have connections to the other side, spirits that granted him powers beyond those of typical practitioners. But separating historical fact from folklore is challenging, especially at this distance. Do any of the accounts mention specific treatments or rituals he performed? Marcus asked. Dr. Valdez hesitated. There is one volume. It's not typically made available to researchers because of its fragile condition and questionable provenance. But given your official capacity with the Historical Society, she left the room, returning a few minutes later with a slim, worn book bound in faded red leather. This is supposedly Facilier's own grimoire, his book of spells and procedures. It came to us as part of a private donation in the 1950s. The donor claimed it had been in his family since the late 19th century. Eleanor and Marcus exchanged excited glances as Dr. Valdez carefully placed the book on the table. I'll leave you to it, she said. Please use the cotton gloves provided and let me know if you need anything else. The grimoire's pages were yellowed and brittle, covered in spidery handwriting, interspersed with diagrams and symbols similar to those in Beauregard's journal. Much of the text was in French or Creole, with occasional passages in what appeared to be a phonetic rendering of African languages. My French is rusty, Eleanor admitted, but I can make out some of this. They spent hours poring over the grimoire, taking careful notes and photographs where permitted. Among the various remedies and rituals described, they found one that seemed particularly relevant, a procedure titled Le Visage Emprunté, the borrowed face. Listen to this, Eleanor said, translating slowly. For those marked by birth or accident, whose faces cause them to be shunned by society, I offer the ultimate remedy. Not a mask to conceal, but a new face entirely. The subject must be young, their spirit still malleable. A sacrifice is required, not of blood but of identity. What is taken away must be replaced, lest the spirits claim more than was bargained for. That sounds like what Beauregard might have sought for Thomas, Marcus noted. But what does he mean by, what is taken away must be replaced? Eleanor continued reading, her expression growing troubled. The ritual requires an object to serve as a vessel, preferably something that captures likeness, such as a mirror, painting, or a photograph. The face is transferred to the vessel, leaving the subject unmarked but incomplete. Without proper conclusion of the ritual, the subject exists in a state of in-between, neither fully present in this world nor departed to the next. So, if Beauregard had this ritual performed on Thomas, Marcus began, and if the photograph we found was used as the vessel, Eleanor continued. They looked at each other, the implications hanging in the air between them. That would explain why Thomas appears faceless in the portrait, Marcus said slowly. His face had been removed, transferred to another object. And if Elizabeth's letters are accurate, he died shortly afterward, Eleanor added. Perhaps the ritual wasn't completed properly, or the replacement Facilier mentioned wasn't provided. Oh, but that still doesn't explain what's happening now, Marcus pointed out. The changing digital images, the disturbances at the society. Eleanor frowned, turning pages until she found a section near the end of the grimoire. There's something here about containment and release. My translation is rough, but it suggests that faces or spirits contained in vessels can be disturbed if the vessel is handled or moved after long periods of dormancy. The energy, for lack of a better term, seeks completion of the interrupted ritual. So, by finding the photograph and digitizing it, Marcus said, we may have inadvertently released something that was contained for over 150 years. Eleanor finished, her academic skepticism increasingly difficult to maintain in the face of their discoveries. As they prepared to leave the library, the afternoon sun was already beginning to fade, casting long shadows across the campus. The St. Louis Cemetery would be closing soon, but they had just enough time to make a quick visit. The cemetery was a city of the dead, with above-ground tombs necessitated by New Orleans' high water table. The white stone structures gleamed in the golden evening light, creating an eerily beautiful landscape of monuments to the departed. A few tourists lingered, taking photographs of the more famous tombs, including that of Marie Laveau. The Devereux family tomb was located in an older section, a substantial structure with classical elements that reflected the family's wealth and standing. The marble had yellowed with age, and lichen grew in the crevices of the ornate carvings. The heavy iron door was secured with a rusted chain, though it appeared to have been opened relatively recently for a burial. Eleanor and Marcus examined the names engraved on the tomb's exterior. Beauregard and Elizabeth were there, as were their known children who had lived to adulthood, but there was no mention of Thomas. Not surprising, Marcus said. If they went to such lengths to hide him in life, they would hardly acknowledge him in death. Eleanor nodded, then noticed something unusual. Near the base of the tomb, partially obscured by years of dirt and vegetation, was a small carving. Not a name, but a symbol similar to those they had seen in Facilier's grimoire. "Look at this," she said, kneeling to get a better view. As she brushed away the dirt, more symbols became visible, forming a line across the lower portion of the tomb. "They're protective marks," Marcus said, recognition dawning on his face. Like the ones in Beauregard's journal, he wasn't just documenting what Facilier did, he was recreating the symbols himself. "To contain whatever was released," Eleanor murmured. "But contain it where? If Thomas died and was buried here, maybe he wasn't buried in the tomb," Marcus suggested. "The ritual might have required something different." The cemetery attendant was making his rounds, announcing closing time. Eleanor quickly photographed the symbols before they left, her mind racing with possibilities and implications. As they walked back to Marcus's apartment in the fading light, neither spoke much, each processing what they had learned. The streets of the French Quarter were coming alive with evening activity, music spilling from bars, tourists wandering with drinks in hand, street performers setting up for the night. "Would you like to come in?" Marcus asked when they reached his building. "We could order food, go through everything we've learned." Eleanor hesitated. The thought of returning to her empty apartment with the knowledge they now possessed was oddly unsettling. "Sure," she agreed. "I could use some dinner after all that research." Inside, Marcus's apartment seemed less oppressive than it had earlier. He opened the blinds to let in the last of the daylight and cleared the clutter from the coffee table to make space for their notes and laptops. "I'll order from that Thai place on the corner," he said, reaching for his phone. The usual? Eleanor nodded, settling on the couch with her laptop. I want to look at the different versions of the portrait again. If what we read in the Grimoire is accurate, the changes might be significant. While they waited for the food, they reviewed everything they had learned, creating a timeline of events. 1861. Thomas Devereux born with facial deformity. 1862. Beauregard consults various physicians without success. Oct. 1862. Beauregard engages Dr. Facilier Novdek. 1862. Some procedure or ritual performed on Thomas. 1863. Continued payments to Facilier. Elizabeth's distress evident in letters. Aug. 1863. Family portrait taken. Sep. 1863. Thomas dies. Final payment to Facilier. The timing fits, Eleanor said. Facilier performed some version of the borrowed face ritual on Thomas, using the photograph as a vessel. But something went wrong. Maybe the replacement wasn't provided, or the ritual wasn't completed properly. Thomas died, and whatever essence or energy was contained in the photograph remained trapped there until we disturbed it. That still sounds like something from a horror movie rather than historical research, Marcus pointed out, though his tone lacked conviction. I know, Eleanor admitted, but we've both experienced things we can't explain since we started working with the Devereux collection. At some point, we have to consider possibilities outside our usual academic framework. Their food arrived, and they ate while continuing to examine the digital versions of the portrait. The first showed Thomas as they had initially seen him, standing slightly apart from the family, his face a blank surface. The second showed him behind Elizabeth, hands on her shoulders. The third, which only Marcus had seen, showed him looking directly at the camera with the suggestion of features beginning to form. I've been thinking about the replacement mentioned in the Grimoire, Marcus said, setting aside his empty container. What if it wasn't an object but another face? What if Facilier tried to give Thomas someone else's face? That would be ghoulish, Eleanor said with a shudder, but it would explain Elizabeth's horror at what had been done to her son. Not just that his deformity had been removed, but that he had been given something else. And if the ritual wasn't completed, if Thomas died before the new face was fully integrated, it might explain why he appears faceless in the photograph. Neither his original face nor the replacement took hold. Eleanor nodded slowly. So now, after all this time, the incomplete ritual is seeking resolution. But what does that mean for us? What does it want?